there's a health warning on this presentation, which is that it is a little heavy in the diagrammatic department. I make sense of the world through diagrams, mainly created in PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do, you haven't got to worry about the details of these schematics and diagrams. The most important thing is that they show the evolution of our approach, the evolution of our thinking in terms of understanding CaBA's value proposition, and also how we can evaluate that value delivery. So the core challenge here is catchment management. How do we take a whole systems approach? This is where we started, over 10 years ago, is trying to think about how we want to take a whole systems approach. We want to take an ecosystems approach, and we want to take a collaborative co-production, co-creation approach as well. And CaBA came along and right into the midst of that early thinking. And for me, it's just me saying it, but I believe it's true, that CaBA has really developed from those initial thoughts about a collaborative approach in catchment management into a truly evidence-based, whole system, adaptive and participatory approach. And the key to that is, we've always said that. I've always said very easily, it trips off the tongue, it doesn't trip off the tongue. It's very easy to say that CaBA is these things, but the problem was that we didn't actually know whether it was true. The spirit of CaBA, the ethos of CaBA, the catchment-based approach, is strong, but the evidence that it is robust and that it actually works and it delivers value and outcomes as well as outputs initially didn't exist. So we were kind of doing it on a wing and a prayer. So a very quick potted history. This is just some graphics to sort of show how CaBA evolved. And you've seen some of it. I'm sure you've seen many of these things before. So CaBA adopted the American EPA, US EPA's adaptive watershed management cycle as its kind of process, its workflow. And this was a slide that we developed in 2011, 2010. So quite a long time ago, but very quickly we started to realize that we were onto something that had potentially very high impact, and that this approach, with all of these virtues that have got arrayed around it here, that it allows us to develop a shared understanding, a shared common language. It allows us to explore complex issues, identify pressures, target, develop plans, deliver, and obviously evaluate. This was very early in our thinking, and there was a huge amount of work that went into trying to understand every single stage of this process. But obviously it's an adaptive and iterative cycle. That's the whole point of it. And the only way you can learn, the only way you can iteratively improve something or to adapt something is through evaluating it, through reflecting, through evaluating, through measuring, trying to gain understanding about what has succeeded and what has failed, and then obviously working to develop your approach. And then in 2013, that's when the catchment-based approach came into full being. And then since then, the work's continued to refine our understanding. So we're fairly confident that the CaBA approach is scalable, that it's integrated, it is truly collaborative if it's done right, and if it's done at the right scale with the right people around the table. But CaBA is also very good at adapting, and all along the history of the catchment-based approach, there's been new ideas and concepts, some not new, some reinvigorated. The natural capital approach arrived 5-6 years ago, as if from nowhere. We were completely focused on an ecosystems approach, and then we were encouraged to adapt that. And CaBA has shown that it is very able to adapt and adjust its method, both at all sorts of spatial scales, so both very locally, right the way through to the partnership level and up to a regional or national level. But as CaBA has adapted and CaBA has evolved, it's become a bit organic in the sense that it kind of follows the trends and it adjusts, and it is adaptive, but it's not necessarily doing that in as intelligent a way as it possibly could. CaBA tends to follow the money, and it tends to be quite opportunistic. So we started to realize that we didn't have as much insight into how CaBA partnerships were adapting as we at first thought. Subsequently, we took the adaptive management cycle on to a whole new level of detail. again, all the time working to improve our understanding of how this process works. And working groups have been established to study every single element of this process. The focus initially was about building partnerships, but gradually we've moved on and on. But because monitoring and evaluation is the last stage in the process, it tended to be the thing that we got to last as CaBA was establishing itself. And really the enabling conditions that are required to be in place in order to unlock the impact potential of this cycle, this process, were also fairly poorly understood, even up as recently as 4 or 5 years ago. So the sophistication of the CaBA process and our understanding of it has developed and evolved, but there are some gaps in our capabilities, and there are some gaps, and monitoring and evaluation was definitely emerging as one of those gaps. And more, I'm not going to dwell on the more diagrams. I love diagrams. But there's this key role in CaBA that we've always been searching for what the key unique selling point of CaBA is. What is it that CaBA does that no other approach can deliver? And one of those emerging roles has been that as CaBA as a facilitator, as someone described it as the glue that holds everything together. But critically within that, as part of a co-creation or a co-governance process, the role of a knowledge broker, whether it's an individual, an organization, or a collective, is absolutely critical. The knowledge broker is the point at the hub which brings the data and evidence together, which really develops a narrative about value, which understands the needs and wants and the opportunities and the suitability of the landscape to receive environmental actions or community-based actions, or where it identifies critically where those needs are, where there's a deficiency of benefit, and therefore and so CaBA has instinctively, I think, been very strong in that area of playing the role of knowledge broker. But again, we know it to be true, but we don't have evidence from evaluative work that it is true. And the other thing the final thing that's emerged about CaBA, which is that it's all about language. The unique skill of the knowledge broker in catchment partnership, in collaborative working, in co-governance, as you guys would describe it, is about communicating about the issues in the right language for the stakeholders that you're engaging. And again, CaBA has always been very confident that it is good at this, and that the CaBA community across the country has a very strong capability in this knowledge brokerage, evidence-based narrative development kind of role in terms of developing a narrative about value with stakeholders. And but again, the evidence that what I just said is true is I can't necessarily present to you, or I couldn't present to you a few years ago. I noticed that my word vomit cloud thing that I found on the internet didn't have water on it, so I thought I'd better put that on, and a few other keywords which perhaps date it. So roll back to 2016, and there was a strategic planning day that the Catchment Based Approach organised nationally, and the general feeling was that as the notes say here, it was becoming increasingly clear that monitoring and evaluation was going to be critical for the development of this iterative, collaborative co-creation process, and at that time there was a bit of a shortage of that. Now, we felt that monitoring and evaluation really did hold the key to success. It undoubtedly does. It's how you demonstrate that you're being successful in terms of delivering your intended outcomes. And it's essential for adaptive action learning, which undoubtedly CaBA is a very good example of. So it was identified then that CaBA needed to establish its own monitoring and evaluation process. The partnerships are undoubtedly getting a lot better at monitoring and evaluating environmental outputs and outcomes, i.e., do the nature-based solutions that we're delivering work? Are they effective, and do they deliver impact at a landscape scale? Catchment partnerships are on a very steep learning curve, but they are getting quite good at that through the huge efforts of the data group and the monitoring groups at a national level. However, what was evidently clear was that CaBA was a lot less confident when it came to evaluating their collaborative co-creation processes. And for us, as you'll see in a second from some of the additional work we did, the real USP, the real unique selling point of CaBA is the ability to affect systems change and to deliver social and knowledge capital benefits, so as well as natural capital benefits. I won't dwell on this because I'm aware I'm probably short of time, but we went back to basics and we had to learn about evaluation all over again. So there's some amazing work that's been done in America. The Collective Impact Forum are world leaders in evaluating social change, and so I tend to use their stuff. Evaluation design, define the system, articulate a set of questions to help you understand how change is happening in the system, determine what approaches have the capacity to create change, essentially. Use evaluation as a catalyst for learning and decision making. So these are our golden rules. I love this diagram, the 6 conditions of systems change, because CaBA delivers all of these in its own way. CaBA can influence policy, practice, and resource flows, but it also creates connections and relationships. It can even out and balance power dynamics. It can deliver transformative change in changing attitudes and behavior of stakeholders. So for me, that's why I like it. And then just a sort of a slightly, Sermon on the Mount kind of statement, but I love this quote: evaluation of systems change involves the systemic collection of relevant, credible, and useful information for informing decisions, taking pragmatic and strategic actions. The purpose of evaluation is about sense making, reality checking, assumption testing, answering questions, increasing our ability to take risks and learn from our successes, and most importantly, that's me putting the brackets in there, our failures. Evaluation is not about methods, it's about reasoning. So this is our kind of our golden rule that we've stuck to. So diagram alert. So what we then did is we tried to work out what exactly it was about catchment-based approach and co-governance and collaborative working that delivered value. And this is the diagram that we came up with. There will be no test. You don't have to focus on the details. The key things of this is what we identified is that the collaborative approach of CaBA essentially unlocks 2 key benefits. One is knowledge capital using data and evidence, and one is social capital through bringing stakeholders together and starting a conversation. And it's that unlocks everything else: planning, finance, delivery, natural environment restoration. And it's with that unlocks the benefits. And it's an adaptive iterative process. So if you evaluate the benefits of the process, then you can learn and you can iteratively improve your process. So in simpler terms, it's basically CaBA does this, which is it creates all of these 3 capitals and delivers benefits in a whole variety of ways. And as I said before, CaBA was getting pretty good at assessing the natural capital benefits, but it was weak in evaluating it, the knowledge and social capital benefits, if you like, that the process was producing. So the process benefits weren't particularly clearly understood, whereas the environmental outputs and outcomes were actually quite well understood. So that you can see the contradiction in CaBA. We've identified our unique selling point, which is that we create knowledge capital and social capital, and that unlocks our ability to create environmental benefits. We're quite good at understanding the environmental benefits, the end point, but we're terrible in our understanding of the process that we deliver. So there's a real mismatch in that. So we developed a theory of change about social change as well, which I won't dwell on again, short time, but it's a fairly straightforward sort of communication, social marketing kind of theory of change. And that helps us to understand how we're taking stakeholders on a journey through a process of collaborative working. And we can design our evaluation to assess every single stage in the theory of change. Or indeed, if we decide we don't have to, then we can indeed leave one of the stages out because it's a theory of change. And the final piece of the jigsaw was to develop a log frame. So we took a fairly generic logical framework. This is an example that I put together for social and non-profit marketing. But basically, a log frame helps you design evaluation, whether it's evaluating a whole program like CaBA, or whether it's evaluating an individual workshop or intervention. If you use a log frame to design your evaluation, then you stand a much better chance of delivering robust evidence that says whether or not you've been successful and helps you learn from the outcomes that you've delivered. And this is the CaBA log frame that we put together. You can study this at your leisure afterwards. But essentially, we went into fine detail working with academic partners, Imperial College particularly, to develop all of the different elements. And from that, we put together the questionnaire, the form, the dreaded form, and from that, the catchment partnerships were asked to fill that in. So 104 catchment partnerships filled in the form, and that allowed us to, we did a first in 2016, I think, 17, we did the first evaluation of CaBA on ourselves, and that created the first report, which covered the first 3 to 4 years of CaBA. And subsequently, we've repeated the process annually in 17, 18, 18, 19, and indeed 19, 20. And so, and what this now gives us is what we didn't have before, is an insight into starting to get an insight into not only the outputs that CaBA is delivering, but also starting to have a method that allows us to understand the outcomes of CaBA, not just in terms of environmental outcomes, i.e. what have you done and what has it achieved for the environment, but what have you done, how have you done it, and how has that process delivered benefits for the participants and for the local community and for stakeholders and for local economy and the rest. I should say one final thing to say is what we realized is that while CaBA was not very good at evaluating itself, indeed it hadn't really been evaluated apart from one initial foray in the early years of CaBA. The other thing is that there's a twin track here. One, CaBA has to get better at evaluating itself, but also we recognize that the success of this evaluation is entirely dependent on the abilities of the partnerships themselves to undertake proper evaluation of their work. So the form doesn't ask them for data. It doesn't do evaluation for them. They are encouraged, and we have tried to support them to build their capacity to undertake evaluation, and they then report the results of that evaluation to us through the form. So there's a really important synergy there between the partnership's capacity to deliver an understanding of how to deliver robust evaluation and our framework, which allows us to combine and assimilate that data into an overview of the whole movement. And we've just started the process now, even after all these years, of starting to actually delve into the data in more detail. So aligning some of the reporting outputs with 25-year environment plan and other strategic plans, looking at the finances, looking at the amount of money that's been brought in as a very simple, blunt measure of success. But there's so much more to the success of CaBA. How do we know if a CaBA partnership is successful? Some of the most successful partnerships have actually brought in relatively little money for environmental works, but they have delivered significant, what you might call co-governance benefits through their processes. So it's not as simple as saying the partnership that's brought in the most money is the most successful, because actually some partnerships are delivering a very robust collaborative approach without actually bringing in very much money yet. And we're starting to, again, to delve into some of the details on individual sectors. So in this case, farming, and how the partnerships are engaging with the farming community, and indeed trying to tease out some of the more nuanced and detailed information about the collaborative approaches that are being undertaken with different sectors. And I don't know how that was for time, but that's the end. So I suppose it is what it is.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you, Nick. No, that was great.